Merci, bonjour tout le monde. That's about the extent of my French, but I have a few more words if emergency. It's very nice to be here, and I want to explain a little bit about the nature of the work we do, and then present these ideas to you. I guess there are about 10 of us in our core group, mostly in Toronto, and we mix and match on projects around the world, as you heard in the introduction. And the most important thing to note is that we work from practice to theory, not the other way around. So I think I would say accurately that 80% of the best ideas we have are coming from practice, from leading practice. So that when we team up and do something, in fact, it goes like this. We team up with big chunks of the system, I'll mention some of them, and then we do change for 2 or 3 years, focusing and getting results. And then after we do it, I write a book afterwards, not before. And so we do the work, we write a book. We do better work, we write a better book. And if you live long enough, like I have, you write lots of books. And now they're starting to be translated by the Chagnon Foundation, thanks to Claude and others, so that the two themes of today are the themes of the books recently translated. One is coherence, and the other is deep learning. I'll tell you about both of those. So this work of applied, we're trying to get at the easiest possible way to understand how to do big change, and change that makes a difference in the classroom, but also affects the system as a whole. We work, you'll see in the deep learning, I'll refer to the 7 countries we work, but mostly we are working initially in Ontario, and then California said, well, things are working, we see why it's working, please come down and help us. So the last 6 years, we've been working in California, a very big system, 43 million people, 1,009 districts, so that there's lots of opportunity to learn together and to become more practical. I have the website you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner is michaelfullan.ca, so www.michaelfullan.ca. You can go on the website, you'll see a lot of the materials there. We have a YouTube channel, and there's a lot of resources that we've developed from doing that. I am going to use the handout that you have in front of you, more or less following the order of the slides, so you can do that. I'll talk about them as we go. And we'll have a Q&A, I guess, around just before 11. And I'll just give you the 2 questions I'm going to ask you then. I'll give you the questions now. One question, the positive one, I'm going to say, what's the best idea you got from the first 2 hours? So what's the best idea that you think you like? And then the second question is, what's the biggest question mark on your mind about how to bring about change on a large scale? The minimum size we work with usually is a whole school board or district, ranging from size of, sometimes in California, there might be only 10 schools in a district. In Toronto, where we work, there are 583 schools in a single district. So big to small to very large. So we're going to work through these ideas. I'm very proud, actually, to have about 3 or 4 years ago teamed up with the Chagnon Foundation and with Claude to see how, later on I'll refer to leadership from the middle. And I'll give you the more formal definition then, but let me just plant the seed right now. We got to leadership from the middle. You might think of it this way. You have the government level, and then the middle are the school boards and the schools, and then at the community level are individual schools. So we discovered a long time ago that the top-down change doesn't work, usually because the ideas aren't right, but even if they're right, they don't stay right because politicians change, so we can't depend on the top to get the policy right. And then people started to do what they call site-based management, individual schools being able to lead change. And we found with that, with individual schools, that actually only a few of them changed, and it never added up. It never really went to any numbers. So we said, if top-down change doesn't work and bottom-up is too slow, where's the glue? Where's the momentum? And we said it's in the middle. And it's a loose definition. Sometimes you could go to the school board and say the middle are the schools within the school board. So you can shift your terms of reference. But in our case, we're thinking of the province of Quebec. We would say that, okay, government. We have had some interaction with governments around the world. And generally, I would say sometimes they're good to work with. They're focused on implementation. Other times they just seem to be political all the time, that they're not really getting to the substance of implementation. So we tend to then not depend on them. And I'm not saying that you should ignore your government, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to work in Quebec very often. But I am saying that you don't need to depend on them. You have a lot of the resources you can do here, especially when you collaborate, as I'll refer to it, to be able to bring about changes and still be within the context of province policy. So that's the way of setting the stage. But if you take the kind of first slide here, and we'll just kind of set the stage. This slide I just did last week. And I said, what's the smallest number of things that we're learning that I could put on one slide that would cover everything, not all the details, but all the issues. And this is the notion of what is it going to take, because our goal is to raise the bar and close the gap for all learners. So it's equity and excellence at the same time. No subgroup should be working at less effectively. So I'm going to take you through these ideas. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 videos from our deep learning work and get the sense. I know many of you are doing PLCs, professional learning communities. We like PLCs. We don't use the term very much. We just use collaborative cultures, focused collaborative cultures. It's the same thing, that it's when teachers work together with good leadership from other teachers or whoever the leaders are in order to accomplish more. We now have proof that you can accomplish a lot more by working together in a focused way. The proof I'll show you in one of the slides. So let's take the building blocks here at the kind of essence. And we tried to say, when we started this, people were just focusing on the learning, the literacy, numeracy. But then we realized that there's several things that have to happen for this to be successful. One of them is that to have high expectations for all students. Not by itself, but was one of the ingredients. A second one is for teachers to have the pedagogical know-how, which is what is the most engaging. And you'll see later, I'll show you how we shifted from shallow learning to deep learning, because shallow learning, not only was it not effective, it was boring for teachers and students. And so we have pedagogical know-how. And then caring relationships, obviously a big one, but one that really is easy to miss. And we have some interesting concepts now where how do you establish caring relationships with students who aren't fitting in to school, but still need to be connected. And then the last one is life circumstances. We don't expect you to change the life circumstances of each and every student, but we do know that you have to take into account where they're coming from. Where are they in their lives? And how do we do that? Last week I was in Moncton, New Brunswick, in a school that's called TESS, which is a therapeutic, a couple of other names. And in it, students who aren't fitting into some schools go to that school for a year to get in touch with it. And the life circumstances are the main driving part. So we have that as a foundation. Those are the 4 things. The question then is, if these are the 4 crucial things, how do you breathe life into them? I'm going to call it oxygenate. That's a real word, I think. How do you breathe life into these 4 things? You can, and this is where we get into the strategy. And so number 1, you could say, well, an individual teacher could be that good to do this. We call that human capital. One teacher, great. But one teacher at a time is not going to do it. So we have to then see what else is going to happen. And the big thing is focused collaboration. This is what PLC does when it does it well, is that, in other words, learning from other teachers. in a focused is very important, focused, specific, collaborative way, that to do the things that are at the bottom of that triangle, to interface with that. So that's the second one that has to be existing as a strategy. The third one is enabling leadership. This could come from teacher leaders. Certainly it comes from school leaders, school principals, and others. If there's one thing we know in these second two tiers of the triangle is lateral learning. Learning from peers is the most powerful learning you can have if those peers are a little further down the line and they have something that you can learn from. So lateral learning, I would say, is our most powerful strategy. And then at the top are targeted policies, I call them. These are policies that invest in the direction of this. And when we have a system that's working quite well, we work in Finland, for example. We work in Victoria, which is in Australia, where the top is trying to get those targeted policies better organized. Sometimes it's investment of money. Sometimes it's the right policies. Sometimes it's providing support. And sometimes it's figuring out how do you assess progress. So this is the picture that I've done recently that kind of summarizes it in one slide. And you can think about it in terms of these as a checklist or a combination of things that have to happen. So let's get into equity. This is, lots of people talk about equity, and they refer to importance of all students learning. But we take it in a certain way, which is equity is not just having a policy of equity. Equity is not just having a vision or an expectation of it. Equity is getting results. And by results, I've defined it as no subgroup should do worse than any other subgroup. I don't mean each and every individual, but I mean on the average, no subgroup. So we know, for example, in Ontario, where we have tracked literacy and done something about it, that English language immigrants, where they come in at the beginning and they start way low, that within 5 years we can close the gap to nothing. That is, English language learners end up learning at the level of students that we're already starting in Ontario. We've done it because we focused on English language learning strategies and specific things. So that's what I mean by this. I'm going to, this is the book that we did on coherence. I'm going to take you through our simple coherence framework. And we are able to, I think, see how coherence is so important and so elusive because it involves coherence in your mind. And we're going to be able to work this through. As I do, and just in terms of the presentation, I'll be asking you from time to time. This room is a lot of people. You're not, normally we're working in groups or at tables, so this won't work here. But I'm going to ask you from time to time to consult with maybe 3 people, like right beside you, just in subgroups. You can decide on that. So periodically I'll do that, and you'll be able to get from there. So the work of coherence, this is the essence of it. We now have the book in French. And we have, what we like for big solutions is that there's a word that's not even an English word, but it's an English concept now. We call it simplexity. So simplexity is when you take something that's complex and you reduce it to the smallest number of important pieces. And that's the simple part, small number, in this case 4. And then you make those pieces go together. And that's the synergy of it. That's the complex part. So we've got here, you'll see in the 4, the focus, direction, collaborative cultures, deep learning, and securing accountability. So when we have that, and this is not 1, 2, 3, 4. No change can happen as a cookbook. It's more like, I would say, the best analogy is the functioning heart. Blood is flowing in and out of all 4 chambers. If any one chamber is damaged, you die or you get sick. Same with organization. If any one of these is damaged, you can't function in an organization. So we do attend to all 4 at once, but we tend to focus on the top 2 to begin with. Making sure the direction is focused. Usually it's about literacy. It's about mathematics. It's about high school graduation. And recently, it's about deep learning, focus to get learning that will be suitable for students to be able to be good citizens, not 10 years from now, but while they're being in education, while they're being in school. So focus direction is one, and collaboration. You can't have focus direction without collaborating, because the focus direction will be only on paper if you're not collaborating. Collaboration is necessary to get the best ideas for the focus direction, and it's necessary for people to understand and believe in it. So we're going to work our way through that. Coherence. Here's where I want to make sure we understand the definition. People, when they tried to bring about the change I'm talking about, used to refer to alignment, and a lot of them still do. So we have our policy. It's aligned to our professional learning communities. It's aligned to the financial investment. It's aligned to the assessment system. All of those alignments don't mean anything for one reason. They only exist on paper. And so we want to shift the emphasis here and say coherence is fully and only subjective. If you think about that, it basically says if it's not in your mind, it doesn't exist. That's a powerful criterion. If it's not in your mind, it doesn't exist. So that this already tells us we've got a lot of work to do, but it's much more complicated than that, because what we're talking about is shared coherence. It's got to be in the minds of several people who are understanding of that way. So it's the shared depth of understanding about the nature of the work. And right away, you know you can't get coherence from a lecture like this. You get a little bit. You can't get coherence from a big speech, by a document, all of those things. Even by meeting once a month, you can't get it. It's what happens in between meetings that counts, which is the day-to-day culture. There's only one way to get coherence, and that is to have a daily culture that's interactive, that's focused, that takes us back to the triangle. So the strategy of, I want to think about strategy here. And in this slide I've said, it really requires two things to be effective, the clarity of the strategy. One is the nature of the idea, and the other is the process of change. What is that produces greater ownership and capacity. So the idea's got to be a good one. It normally has to be changed and redeveloped as it goes. But so is the interaction. I want to give you two examples. And I hope they translate well, because it's hard with some of the more insights to get the words right. But here's the first example from business. The CEO of Honeywell, when he retired 5 years ago, he was interviewed and he was asked the following question. They said, you've been successful over 25, 30 years. What's the most important thing you've learned about leadership? They asked him. And this is what he said. He said, the most important thing is to be right at the end of the meeting, not at the beginning of the meeting only. I hope that translates. If you're right this is a metaphor. If you're right at the end of the meeting, you've processed it with the group. If you're right at the beginning of the meeting, you're only right in your own mind, which isn't much value. So that's a very important way. I saw another more elaborate example. In our work in Australia, we were working in the Australian Capital Territory, which is in Canberra, 80 schools, a stagnant system. They wanted to move forward where they started to do that. And when we first went there to the high school, Canberra High School, we went into the school that day just to see what things were like, to talk to people. And teachers were they had just started a peer coaching feedback system. They trained 3 teachers in a quality teacher framework to observe, teach, and give feedback. All of the teachers that we talked to that day said, we're not going to do this. We didn't even ask them the question. They said, we're not going to do this because we don't want others coming into our classroom, observing what we're doing and telling us how to teach better. So we would definitely not do it. I'm going to call that resistance. And so they said that. We came back 3 years later, and then I'll fill in the blanks in a moment. And everybody was doing it in that school. Everybody was participating in the peer supervision feedback. And they were getting results. Teaching was better. Students were more engaged. Teachers were learning more. Graduation actually started to go up. And so, yet these were the same people. So we have a bunch of people at the beginning who are against something. And 3 years later, Same people, they're in favor of it. So I said to the deputy principal who was in charge of the project, I said, this is amazing from a change point of view, because you've got people who've changed their minds. And so I said, I want to ask you a killer change question. And so he said, what is it? I said, is participation in this peer coaching feedback, is it mandatory or voluntary for teachers? He didn't hesitate a second. He said, it's voluntary but inevitable. Think about that, voluntary but inevitable. And what did they do? When they first had this first discussion, they said, all right, we understand you're wary about it. You don't have to do it. We just like 2 or 3 people to try it, see what it's like, and report back. So they did that. Secondly, they said, even if you do it and you get feedback, you don't have to follow the feedback. We want you to learn from it, but it's up to you what you choose. So they made it easier and more voluntary to do that and to test it out. Because when people are against things, sometimes they don't know what they don't know. So they may be against it but not know enough about it. So this important part of giving change a chance, of looking inside it, of not being too emphatic. In fact, I would go so far, not quite, but almost this way, to say it this way. If you want to kill a good idea, mandate it. If you want to stop a good idea, tell people they have to do it. And then the psychology of change, you can just see it coming up. Because good ideas have to prove themselves through the combination. So if we look then at focus direction, this is very important because it has to be, you have to figure out how to get started in a way that doesn't impose it, but helps people define it. And so we often start with moral purpose, and I want to ask you to take a look at this. This is where I'll ask you to do something individually, and then in about 4 or 5 minutes, I'll ask you to talk to each other in groups of 2s or 3s. At the end of your handout, there's a worksheet that has these questions. What is your moral purpose? What actions are you taking? How do you know you're getting anywhere? I'd like you to just spend 3 minutes individually now writing response in that 1-2 sentences. How would you answer this for yourself? I won't ask you to share a lot of the content, but I want to take this somewhere and first of all get you to focus on moral purpose. What is it? What actions you're taking? How are you working with others to get it? And how do you know you're making any progress? So 3 minutes, over to you. I want to stop and dwell on moral purpose with you because almost all goals and vision statements and strategic plans emphasize moral purpose. This is our work is to raise the bar, close the gap for all students that we're working with. So that's the aspiration. The problem is it's only on paper. So we want to make it more problematic, more challenging. What is it about moral purpose? How do you actually get going in this development? And then it becomes much more difficult because now the questions we've asked you here, not only is what your moral purpose, but how do you interact with other teachers about moral purpose? How do you know you're getting somewhere in this development? And that this is where we want to open it up and talk about how do we, when we know that some schools do well and other schools with the same types of students don't do as well, something's different here. There's a variation of something. So I want to suggest it this way. When you think about moral purpose, let me ask this question. If I were to ask teachers, can all students learn? Almost all teachers, I think, would say yes. But if I'm looking at a school where all students are not learning for 3, 4, 5 years, I doubt very much if those teachers in those schools deep down really believe that these students can learn because they're not learning. How could they possibly believe it? I'm not saying they're lying. I'm saying there's something going on here psychologically that we have to get and open up and begin to do that. Because when people are thinking that all students, let's take that if we got inside the souls of those people and tried to figure out what is making them think that way. And then we're to ask them ask the question, what would change their minds? But all students, these particular students can learn. I can tell you two things that will not change their minds. And it's strange to say it this way, but it's true. One of it is research evidence. Right? You're doing this work. Here's another school just like yours that's getting success. Therefore, it can be done. But research, in a moment, I'll tell you why it's not convincing. The second thing that's not convincing is I call it increased moral exhortation. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it means that you emphasize moral purpose louder. You say it louder because it's so important. And the reason that those two things don't work is the first one says it can be done. The second one says it should be done. Neither of them help the teacher get it done. So that's why it doesn't work. What is going to help the teacher change their mind? If they start having new experiences with students in relatively non-threatening circumstances with help from others, that now these students are starting to learn more, and then they see it, they experience, they start to believe it. This is why change is so difficult. I don't believe it until I do it, but I'm not sure I want to do it because I don't know how to do it. And so getting started in this is really this part of making sure we think of moral purpose as a process of transforming the actual ability and commitment to do this. Let me ask you a more interesting question. I'm not even going to answer it. I'll just ask it rhetorically. Can all teachers learn? That's a very interesting question. The answer better be yes. It doesn't mean 100% will learn, but in the same way we think of students, we should be able to say that all teachers will learn and get better. In fact, that's the definition of a professional. Always getting better because you're delving into this. So I'm just opening up the dynamics of this. This brings us to collaboration, because collaboration, we already have found out that collaboration is one of the most powerful strategies we know of, but. And here's the but. Collaboration by itself isn't necessarily a good thing. You can collaborate to do nothing. You can collaborate to do the wrong thing and not even know it sometimes. So it's only a particular kind of collaboration. We also use the phrase capacity, increased capacity. And then we say, yes, increased capacity. We usually mean better pedagogy, working together more effectively. We also find that capacity by itself is too vague. And then you start to move to be more specific. That's where I want to go with you. In PLCs, they've made it somewhat specific. It still is an interesting question for us. There was a study done in 2015 by the Boston Consulting Group in the U.S. Funded by the Gates Foundation. And they studied PLCs across the U.S. And this is what they found. And it's curious, except when you think it through. They found that school principals liked PLCs more than teachers liked them. Think about that. Principals like PLCs more than teachers like PLCs. I think the answer to that is because teachers were not owning enough the substance of what was happening, and that principals were the ones that had, in the U.S. at least, latched onto this as a solution. And then when they asked teachers how would they like to learn, they named all the things that were in PLC design. They said, we like to learn with other teachers, we like to have some time to get better, we want to get more specific. So you got a lot of that. So what I'm wanting to do is getting at more precise and more effective forms of collaboration. There are 6 sticky phrases that we've derived from the change work we've done. A sticky phrase is an insight that is valuable and stays with you. And so that's where I'm going to be. I'm going to highlight those 6. There's a slide later with all 6 of them. These are insights about change that we've learned by doing it. And the one that I want to just surface here is the difference between precision and prescription. There's a very big difference. Precision is when you're specific and clear about something. Prescription is when you make it an order, that you have to do it. So what works, and you'll see the subtleties have changed, there aren't that many, is if you can get more and more specificity or precision without imposing it, you've got both things that are necessary for effectiveness. And we have found that when things get more specific and people don't feel like they're being judged and change imposed on them, they start to like what's specific because it works. And I want to show you now a very interesting graph. Raise your hand if you know or heard about the work of John Hattie in visible learning. So probably a third of you. So I'm not particularly emphasizing this, but this John is a good colleague of ours. He's from New Zealand. He now works out of Melbourne in Australia. And he has, over the last 10 years, developed this visible learning set of findings, where he's looked at specific teaching pedagogy, linked it to results with students, and calculated what he calls effect sizes. Effect sizes are how much impact does a given strategy. So he finds, for example, feedback to students specific has a good impact. Or something else like metacognition of helping students understand the nature of learning. That also has. But about 8 years ago, I said to him, your work is getting more and more focused. It's getting better. And you are helping teachers see what is more effective. But I said the problem with it, the limitation, is that all of the things you're looking at are the individual pedagogical practices of teachers. We happen to know that the group work is more effective than the individual work. Just makes sense if you've got the group doing the good specific things. I said, what do you know about collaboration and its impact? And he said, we haven't really looked at that enough yet, but I will start to look at it now. So he shifts the emphasis, adds collaboration as a focus, and starts to assess and amass the research evidence. And in his effect sizes, he says about as a statistical measure, that an effect size of 0.40 approximately is worth looking at. And if you go up from there, it's still not very powerful, but it's worth looking at. If you go up from there into higher numbers, you start to get really having an impact. So a few months ago, he wrote, with a couple of other colleagues, a short article, 6 pages long, reporting on the findings. And that's what I want to emphasize for you. If you look at this table, there's the article in the bottom of it, is the factors that influence student learning. And you'll see there's several of his, the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. The ones below the top one, they're about how individual teachers with certain skills are getting results. But they're all not very strong necessarily. And then you add collective efficacy. And there's a few terms that I want to sort out here. I don't find the word collaboration very useful because it's too vague. So we don't use it without qualifying what it is. There's only, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 words that are concepts that are the right ones to use. They're more or less mean the same thing. His is collective efficacy. Ours is collaborative professionalism. Andy Hargraves, who works with me, myself, we tend to, they're the same thing. But look at this is confirmatory, but it's also astounding, I think. That collective efficacy, and we'll get on the next slide what his definition, the components of it. Collective efficacy blows everything else out of the water. In fact, what collective efficacy is, it's leveraging those below that top line with the group doing it in a focused way to get, that's why they get the results. And then when he turns to collective efficacy, he says, and there's all 4 of these that are important. We don't like a long list, but we don't like a list of 1 either, because things are interactive. So you have to have the smallest number. This is his 4. He says one of the 4 pieces of collective efficacy is the joint expectation that a group has that they will, high expectations that they'll get results. The belief that they will get results. Not by itself, but necessary. So that's one thing. Secondly, They pay attention to impact. What's the evidence that we're getting somewhere? How do we know that this is really working? And that, and by paying attention to impact, that's also. All four of these interact, remember, so keep track of that. The third one is that they're putting into practice pedagogical strategies that have some proven value. So they're focusing on things that do work. And the fourth one is about how leaders are interacting with all four of these things to get these results. So I'm trying to, excuse me, get into a nutshell here, the essence of the collaboration that's working. And I'm going to give you a couple of other twists to this in a minute. But for now, I hope you're thinking about collective efficacy. I'd like you to turn to the person beside you, so it might be a total of 3 people, but not much more than that, and say, what do you think about what I've been saying? I've emphasized collective efficacy. I've said it's more powerful than anything else. What's your reaction to that? It's an open-ended question. Your reaction might be, that's what we're doing and we're getting those results, or we're not doing enough, we better do more, or I'm skeptical anyways because it wastes time to collaborate. Whatever it is, give your reaction to each other. About 4 minutes, go ahead. What I'm doing with each of these pieces is my goal is to add clarity to things that can easily be used vaguely. So people could say PLC, and they can mean 5 different things about it. They can talk about collaboration and mean a lot of different things. So we want to get more precise, more clear about it. And there's a couple of more pieces to this that I want to clarify. I've just clarified a minute ago that collective efficacy has precision and it's powerful. And it really replaces the vague talk about PLCs. Or if you like, when PLCs are working, they would have these characteristics. But there's 2 more pieces I want to be crystal clear about. One is leadership, and the other is the relationship between autonomy and collaboration. These are both controversial issues in this. So let's go to leadership. And in this, in a book I did in 2014 called The School Principal, I said, some interesting things are going here, and I don't know the history in Quebec about the role of school leaders, but I do know in the US and somewhat in Ontario that school leaders used to be managers mainly. They ran a good school. And then it started to shift towards what the US calls instructional leadership. And this is where it got a bit wrong. So in the book, I review that because what I was seeing is that somehow people, and I'll give you the correct interpretation of the research, but somehow decision makers got the message about 10 years ago that principals should be instructional leaders. So people like Ken Leithwood, one of our colleagues, and others, they said, well, the principal is the second most important person in the school in terms of influence on student learning. The first most is teachers, and then the principal is second most. So people said, well, principal is instructional leader. So what happened is that policy-wise, policymakers said, we agree with that, so we'll change the role description of the principal. Now you're instructional leader. We'll change the criteria of promotion. We only want to promote and appoint instructional leaders. And furthermore, because this is the way they do it in the US, is that we'll have supervisors at the school board level who will make sure principals are doing this work. They'll monitor them and supervise it. I call that micromanagement madness. And because what it started to look like, excuse me, they were mobilizing this kind of leadership to focus on this. And I would say, thank goodness for the US, because they always do the wrong thing first. So we can learn from it before it's too late. And this is a case where we did. So we said, what's going on here? This doesn't seem right. The instructional leadership is actually not what they're saying it is. So then this took me to this book, and I'll give you the key finding, and there are 3 key findings there, but the most important one is the one at the bottom, which is the principal is a lead learner. Not the instructional leader, doesn't have to be the best pedagogue in the building, but is a lead learner in the sense of helping the group and individuals in the group learn more. So we have the 3. I'm not going to dwell on the other 2. I'll just mention them. The systemness, one on the left, that's really the recognition, and this is again part of the evolution of the job description. We believe this to be the case, necessarily so, that school principals and leaders of all kinds at the school level have to think of themselves as system players. My job is not only to do a good job in my piece of it, but I also have to contribute to other schools. And this is what we'll start to look at, the interactions of schools with each other. We've got, the system is going to get better because I'm going to pay attention to it. And if I put it strongly, I would say it this way. The job description of the school principal needs to become, my job is to develop the collaborative culture within my school, and it's to influence and make a contribution to other schools where I can. My job description is just not inside my school. The system is it. And we would go so far as to say the unit of change is the school board, not one school at a time. Multiple schools, in other words. If you've got 50 schools or 30 or whatever the number is, the whole set of schools on the move is not just the responsibility of the Director General, it's the responsibility of everybody in the system. So that's what we mean by systemness. And then change leaders has to do some of the skills. So I went to the research, the actual research. Vivian Robinson is the main person. She studied the role of the principal across all kinds of examples, and then calculated the effect sizes, much like John Hattie does. And she said there are 5 things that make a difference. And remember, the 0.40 is significant but weak. So she said focusing on objectives, getting resources like time and money, ensuring that there's good quality of individual teachers, and then I'm going to dwell on number 4 in a moment. Number 5 is safe. Look at number 4. Way more important than the other 4. And it shows, and what it is this. It is the degree to which the principal participates as a learner. That's the phrase I would want you to remember. Participates as a learner with teachers in moving the school forward. And this is key. This means that in the principal, you start to think about this participating as a learner. It means that if I'm a new principal and I don't participate as a learner, but I do the other 4 things, and I do that for 5 years, my first 5 years of my career, at the end of the 5th year, I'll be as good as I was at the beginning. 5 times nothing is nothing. I haven't learned much because I haven't participated as a learner. If I participate as a learner, then, and we have a lot of, if you go to my YouTube channel, just name 2 schools you can look at. Park Manor. The principal's name is James Bond, so you can remember that. He's not the real James Bond, but that's his real name. And he took, you can see in this video, usually our videos are 4 or 5 minutes. Longer versions are sometimes 8 minutes. And what he did was go into a school called Park Manor that had grades 6, 7, and 8 in Ontario. And the school, when he arrived, he saw what was there. They had 9 classrooms, 9 teachers, 300 students altogether. And every classroom was an island in itself, instructionally. The teachers liked each other. There was lots of collegiality and friendliness and good atmosphere, but they had no idea how each other were teaching. So what would you do if you were a principal and you believed in this kind of participate as a learner, and you go into that school and you see 9 islands with no cross-learning? How do you get cross-learning without offending the teachers? How do you get them to see the value of it? And this is where the art of change comes into play. And it goes back to what we know about change. You try to work it out jointly. You model it. You participate as a learner. You created an atmosphere of trust. He did all of those things, and they began then to see what it was like. He participated in that. He didn't impose anything, but he enabled it. That's what I said at the beginning. And they began then to learn from each other. I'll just give you one concrete example. They have a protocol where every Friday they have an hour. The 3 grade 6 teachers have an hour. And the 3 grade 7 teachers have an hour, and so in grade 8. And what they do with this protocol, they actually have all of their students, the 300 students, they know, but with Post-its, how well these students are doing individually in literacy and math. And on the back of the Post-it is how they're fitting in socio-emotionally. So they take in this protocol, the teachers sit down, they take one of their students. I'm the teacher, there's 2 others with me. I said, this is so-and-so. I've been done the following things. These things are working. This student is making progress. But I'm stuck on something. What do you think? And then the 3 interact. Then they go on to the second one and the third one. And in each case, they are, in the space of an hour, they've just all of a sudden had to articulate their own situation. They had to listen to 2 others. And they began to say, how do you do that? I want to go and show me how this happens. Keep going in this interactive fashion. So you just increase this. And let me give you also a piece of compatible research from the PLC domain. A group of researchers, 2 of them, studied 8 middle schools in the US. In one district, 4 of them they're all doing PLCs. In another district, they're all doing PLCs. When they asked the teachers questions on a survey, like, do you believe in collaborating with other teachers? There was no difference across the 8 schools. Yeah, most of us believe in this, etc. When they asked the following type of question, to what extent do you sit down with other teachers, examine student work, and in particular student work, and change your teaching as a result of it? Only the schools in the one district said, yeah, that's what we do. The others said, we don't do that. So what you see here is a more substantial version of a PLC. Guess which district got more results? The district that had the specificity. They were implementing this at a level. So it's really the number 4 part here. And then about precision is that leaders keep looking at how are we getting anywhere? Are we making progress? What's the development of this, and how do we go from there? So where we're thinking about collaboration now, we have a much better idea internal to the school. Let's call it intra-school collaboration, inside the school. And collaboration, when it's done with specificity, works. You saw it from John Hattie. In the case of James Bond and Park Manor, their writing scores, grade 6, on the province-wide test from EQAO, went from 42% high proficiency to 83% in 4 years. It got results. It's linked to the actual outcome of getting results. So then we begin to talk about this. One of the controversial issues with this, and I hope this will come up in the Q&A as well, is what about autonomy and what about collaboration? How do they go together? Do they go together? And we've had running discussions with the teacher unions in Ontario, and it goes something like this. At the beginning, teacher leaders will say, we're professionals, let us be autonomous and do our work, and stop imposing these things on us that are distracting us from our good work. And we say, well, that doesn't get the results. That doesn't really deal with what we're learning about collective efficacy. And so we talk further, and then the conversation shifts to, okay, we believe in collaboration, but let us decide how to collaborate. Leave it to us. In other words, each time it's leaving us alone. So what you get this running battle between autonomy and collaboration. And that with teachers saying, I don't get enough autonomy. With the policymakers, I'm saying there's not enough collaboration. What's going on here? And this is where we got the breakthrough. And here's the breakthrough. It's very important. And it's very commonsensical once you name it. If you take, just start with this. Autonomy is not isolation. We have a word for isolation. It's called isolation. And if you're isolated in life, you'll deteriorate. Isolation, if you're on your own all the time, you'll deteriorate. And so we then began to say that, well, what is autonomy? If it's not isolation, what could it be? What's the positive version of that? It goes like this, and it makes common sense once you say it so clearly. Autonomy is that I have good ideas as me, as an individual. When I go to the group, I contribute my ideas to the group, and other people contribute theirs, and I learn something there. And think of it this way, I don't mean it this literally, but today I'm autonomous, I've got good ideas. Tomorrow I'm collaborating, and I contribute and I learn. The next day after that, I'm better autonomously, and so back and forth, back and forth. Autonomy is good, isolation is bad. Autonomy is when you're your own person. But you better be also in the group, because you need to test your ideas, you need to get other ideas, you need to contribute to other people's development. So we call it connected autonomy. We call it collaborative professionalism, the word that Andy uses mostly now. And collaborative professionalism, or connected autonomy, or collective efficacy are all the same things. They are groups of teachers working together to get more precise in impacting things. And because of that, they're also better individually. And when they try things individually and bring it to the group, it's a virtuous, reciprocal relationship and development. So this begins to develop this. I'm not going to ask you to look at this in detail. I did an interesting real-life experiment last year. We were working in Garden Grove, which is a district in Anaheim, California. 80 schools, a lot of difficulty in terms of a lot of poverty, diversity, much to be done. And the district got quite successful, so we filmed 2 or 3 schools. One of the schools we filmed was K3 Peters, 600 students, all in kindergarten to grade 3. And they were very successful. They were stagnant. Principal came in, did the things that we talked about. You could go to my YouTube channel and see the clip on K3 Peters to see how that principal did that. Went from isolation to collaboration that got results. And then after that, the principal got moved. And when I was on camera with her in K3 Peters, I said, what are your plans? This is your 5th year. And she said, yes, this is my 5th year. And I gave myself about 5 years to develop a collaborative culture to the point then where I could leave tomorrow and the school would carry on without me, she said. And this is actually an interesting definition of leadership if you want it. Effective leadership is when a leader develops a collaborative culture for 5 or 6 years to the point where they become dispensable. This is a good way of putting it. After 5 or 6 years, I better have developed a collaborative culture where there are leaders in there that can carry on without me. So that's not my main point because K3 Peters did continue. But the principal, whose name is Michelle, got transferred to another school in the same district that was also stagnant, not going anywhere, called Heritage. And then I said, let's do a real-life experiment. You now know how to combine autonomy and collaboration from the K3 Peters. When you go to the new school, I said, see how fast you can change the culture, really change it, so that teachers are embracing the new thing. And that when, and I said, all I will do, I won't help you, but all I will do is every 6 months I'll send you a question, and I just want you to respond by email in a couple of pages. So she arrived there in the summer. I sent her a question, said, what's the lay of the land, and what are you going to do first? In January, I sent her another question, how's it going so far? You're in there for half a year. And then the following summer, the same, and then I did 4 iterations. And then the results started to come in, and this is their survey. This is agree and strongly agree. Their survey that the district does, a climate survey of each school. These are teachers responding. 2016 is before she arrived. 2017 is when she had been there 14 months. And you just look at the difference about direction, about specificity. And now we have 2018 results. Every one of those numbers on the right-hand column is 100%. 100% of the teachers, 32 teachers, changed from feeling isolated or disconnected, same people, only 2 people left of the 32, to being collaborative, and of course they're getting results. So I'm trying to be pushy about this because it's starting to look, and you'll have questions later, and I appreciate that. So this is just a list of some of the things. This article is in the March issue of Educational Leadership, March earlier this year, so you can get the article or you can download it from my website. So I want to give you one more thing about collaboration. This result is where from from the PISA studies. And the PISA studies and several others have looked at this. They've said variation in the quality of teaching varies greater within a school than between schools. So this means the percentage of ineffective teaching. Variation in the quality of teaching. And this is something that, is tricky, because if you think about this, what PLCs do, good ones, what collaborative cultures do, good collaborative cultures, is they reduce bad variation. Let me put it positively. Bad variation is when there's ineffective teaching. And what is going to, and just think of this, let's say I'm a principal, I get appointed as principal, I come into the school, and I say to the staff, I'm here to reduce ineffective teaching. Right? That's my goal. I would last about 3 days. Right? But when you think about it, is it a good idea to reduce ineffective teaching? Yeah. So how do you do it, and in quotations, get away with it? And you do it just the way I've been talking about. Not too much, no mandatory interaction. People come to see. And if you look at what happens over a period of the Park Manor School or K3 Peters, is that teachers, over a period of 2 or 3 years, because they're interacting, because they're looking at new practices, they jettison the practices that don't work voluntarily, and they retain more of the ones that do. So in a more natural, organic, change the culture way, they're sorting out what works and what doesn't work. And therefore, they end up with better. We add to this ourselves when we want schools to interact with each other so that you're also reducing bad variation across schools. Schools are interacting. I'll show you one school on video. So let me just ask you to take stock here, again with your small group discussion. I've introduced some things that are a little bit controversial about autonomy. Isolation is a bad thing. Autonomy is good. Autonomy is interactive. You need leadership for efficacy, all of that. What do you think so far? And then I'm going to then shift to deep learning for the rest of the time, which is compatible, but we're going to add another agenda. So what do you think so far of my messages? You can agree or disagree. Tell each other. Okay. So we're going to make the shift to deep learning in a minute, but and I've skipped a couple of slides because I want to get to spend enough time on deep learning. I do want to address accountability, which is the fourth part, so we'll double back to deep learning as the third quadrant. And in it, we make the distinction, and when you have a chance to read Cohérence in French, there's a chapter on evaluation that's much more elaborate than I can say in 5 minutes. But here's the point. Richard Elmore, one of our colleagues, said this in 2004. He said, no amount of external accountability will be effective in the absence of internal accountability. He said internal accountability is when people are accountable to themselves and their own group about how well we're doing. And in the book, we have several quotes of people who've done it. And when they actually don't use the word accountability very often, they use responsibility. Individual and collective responsibility. And he also says, Richard says, an internal accountability, he said, no amount of external accountability will be effective in the absence of internal accountability. In other words, policymakers are wasting their time if they load up accountability as policy. We've written about this, it's very clear. They still do it because they're politicians, but it's not effective. And what is effective, because you can't say we don't like bad accountability, which is when it's imposed, therefore we won't have any accountability. That doesn't seem acceptable. We want to know what good accountability is, and all the things I'm talking about are tantamount to good accountability, because the school gets better, the results are better, and the teachers in those situations and the principal come to have what I'm going to call assessment literacy. Not literacy assessment, assessment literacy. And assessment literacy is when you're empowered in 2 ways, professionally and politically. Professionally, you're empowered because you know what you're doing. You can explain it. You can talk the data. You can hold your own in any debate. Politically, you're empowered because your school is doing well, or the board's doing well. Your parents know it, the community knows it, so you get really the best of both worlds. So that's what that bottom one means. This is the one about one of Richard's quotes, which I like. He says, internal accountability logically precedes external accountability. In other words, if you don't get it, you don't get external, because the internal is where the power is. So let's now go to this one on learning, deep learning, which is, I'm going to start with this graph. This is typical of quite a few graphs I could have pulled out from the research. It shows, in this case, the percentage of teachers at each grade level who are saying what percentage of students are engaged in my class, engaged in learning. And you'll see in kindergarten it's 95%, almost everybody's engaged. It goes down, down, down. It's not much more than a third by the time you get to grade 9. Surveys of students show the same thing. And in fact, this is getting worse because for two reasons. The push reason is that, I'm going to put, this is not even a criticism. This is just kind of the way things are now. The criticism, if you want to put it that way, is that regular schooling, as we've known it for the last 125 years, is actually boring. That's the push for most students as they go up and up. And then secondly, the outside, while it's still dangerous, it is dangerous, it's increasingly pulling people out to it. So you get this dynamic, which means that schooling is no longer fit for what it could do. And we saw this 4 years ago, and we said, we've got to think of not just criticizing the fact that schooling is boring, we've got to have alternatives. And so that's when we began to notice schools like Park Manor and others, and we created a deep learning initiative. Most of the things we've learned in 4 years, and they're in this now in this this book that just came out, Apprentissage en profondeur, deep learning. It just out like a week, I think, has come out from the publication. Most of the things are in there. Most of the things we learned were a result of learning it from students and teachers and school leaders. In that book, we didn't have these details 4 years ago. We've got them now. And we've got them now because we jointly did this together with 1,200 schools in 7 different countries. It's the answer to this. It's also the answer to this. This is where we're heading, maybe, if we keep school the way it is. That class size will be no problem. Right? Okay. So this is the book, Deep Learning. Engage the world, change the world. And I'm going to give you a flavor of this. I'm going to give you at least probably 2 videos, I think, to get it. But let's look at the essence of it. This is what the new solution has to entail. It's got to result in engaging, exciting learning for students and teachers. That's the pedagogy. It's got to be make it easy to access technology, the second one. It's got to also think about technology being ubiquitous. To put it one way, you can get twice the learning at the same cost when people are learning more, because they're learning not just 9 to 3. Students in groups, you'll see them. And then the last one about being deep learning. What is deep learning? Again, this is what we have found, that deep learning is quality learning that sticks with you the rest of your life. If we were in a day-long workshop now, I could ask you to think of any learning that you've had in your life so far that has stuck with you. And then you could tell each other, and then say, what are the conditions under which that has happened? That's what we'll see, and that's what we see in our deep learning examples. The 2 videos I'm going to show you are crystal clear on that point. And then it's also, this was the biggest surprise, the pleasant surprise. Deep learning is learning that involves students examining the world in some fashion and wanting to change it. Students are great change agents. We haven't found a student young enough that's not a change agent. And so that this unleashing, really, of incredible power of students being change agents with teachers, it's a very different, we'll give you our model, but it's a very different proposition. So it sticks with you the rest of your life. It involves passion, it involves teamwork, and it's work that's devoted to changing the world. And this is one of the biggest, greatest surprises. It's also, deep learning is good for all students, but it's especially good for students who are disconnected. It's especially good for those students because what we do with students who are disconnected, we give them more boring work to make sure they catch up, right? Which they don't. So we had our breakthrough in some sense was to rethink the outcomes. And we said the learning outcomes, we still believe in literacy, numeracy, high school graduation. So that's a core. But in addition to that, a deeper learning way of thinking about it is to say, what does a student in this world have to be at the end of their, let's say, high school? What do they have to be good at? What are some of the global competencies? And we've selected the 6 C's. I'll comment on them in a moment. But one way of putting this is to say, is it possible for a student to get good grades all the way through school these days and graduate and still not be good at life? You know the answer to that. You can get your good grades, but you may not be equipped for life because life is more complex. And these 6 C's, 4 of them have been around for 20 years, the 4 21st century learning skills. They haven't gone very far. Some of them do it a little. When we added 2, character and citizenship, those 2, which were not in the original list, the whole thing flourished. Because character and citizenship have to do with me as a learner. They touch me directly. Whereas the others are, well, I should learn that, I should learn that. And what we've been doing, and we have protocols and rubrics around each of these 6 3. We've defined them. We've also showing you how you can teach them. We have modules about how to do this. In our kind of development, and I know some of you are interested in joining our deep learning schools and districts, is that we want people to come into this not to do our deep learning work, but to go in a direction that they think they want to go in anyways, and they use us to get there. And this is why the reciprocity of doing this together is so important to the nature of how we do it. So we have been working with those 6 C's, implementing them. And I want to show you now, do I have a, yeah, I think we do. Just with a group of 3, just do this quickly. Letter off A, B, C, just within your group. And if there's 4 of you, it could be A, B, C, A. If there's 2 of you, it could be A, B, B, or A, A, B. So you get cover the A, B, C. Just do that for 30 seconds so I know you've got a letter. Just beside you, beside each other. A or B or C. Okay, so let me do just a quick check. I'll go to Claude. What letter are you? A. So Claude's A. How about you? B? Okay, you're a B. So you've got an A, a B, or C. This is a 4.5-minute clip. When you look at this, I want you to make a note to yourself. If you're an A, do I see character and citizenship in this clip or not? And if so, write it down. Or if you're a B or a C. This is called Young Minds of the Future. And it's a clip from a school in Australia that we work with. Australia started first, so they have more videos that they produced. We have other videos in Canada now that are coming at us all the time. We no longer have to go and seek videos. They come at us because people use videos to explain themselves. So look at this as one example. These are 10 and 11-year-olds, for example, and see what you think. A, B, C.
At Canterbury Primary School today, we're hosting Young Minds of the Future Expo, where 3 schools have come together, Chatham Primary, Ringwood North Primary and Canterbury, to do a project all about the future.
We each have to research a problem and then create something to solve it.
Seeing all these amazing inventions everywhere is awesome. The community's really been great. We've had over 50 people come to our store so far. I've seen so many cool things, from little juice cups to feeding the homeless to transportation, things like our idea.
We've even seen around the world subways.
So this is the automatic dog feeder. You'd set the timer as for 3 o'clock, as you can see with the wires in there. And then as the day would go past, it'd hit that, which is send the current through, and then the dog food would fall down. I thought of it because both my parents go to work and we go to school, and my dog's always left outside at home and she usually just sleeps, so at night she's up. I think it'd be really great for the owners and also their pets' lives and their relationships between each other.
Our idea is a sober sensor, which basically is a steering wheel that will scan for drugs and alcohol through the sweat. As to why we want this is to contribute to the Towards Zero Fund, which is an initiative that will hopefully stop drink driving on the roads and make sure that less people die on our roads.
I decided to make the light pot because I love plants and water and all the beautiful things in nature, and I don't want it to disappear. This will help people look after their plants better and also save water. It shows when your plant is not watered because there's no energy in the dirt, so the light won't go on. But when it's wet, the light will go on to show this plant is watered, you don't need to water it anymore.
We decided to make cricket flour cookies because the population growth on Earth is really fast. Livestock's just not that sustainable. Cows are one of the largest producers of methane on Earth, and methane can contribute to greenhouse gases. However, insects don't let out any methane, so they can reduce greenhouse gases.
So when we found out that in the United States alone there were 4,000 drownings between 2005 and 2014, we thought we had to do something. So we invented a drone that flies over your head and drops a life buoy to save you. So while the lifeguards come and swim out to you, you're floating there ready for them.
Just walking through this small exhibition, looking at all the new inventions, it really just makes you think, oh, that's a good idea and that could help me every day. And like some of them are really cool and I could get and find them really helpful.
Events like Young Minds of the Future is important because it's a chance to work with other people from other schools and hear other people's ideas.
We believe that most of these ideas will make it into the real world. If not, they will be considered and people will know about them.
It shows kids creativity and it lets people have their own point of view. In Young Minds of the Future, we didn't really have a standard, we didn't have to make a certain thing. We got to do basically anything that we thought would change the world, and I find that really interesting.
We have probably over 100 videos like that. They're typically 4-5 minutes long at max, 3, 4, 5. And we used to, when we started this, produce our own videos 10, 12 years ago. And because videos weren't so normal then, and when we tried to produce them, we'd select a school, and then we'd say the school, we want to come out with a couple of cameras and capture what you're doing. And then we found this was before people were used to this media, that they would study themselves first. They would study what they were going to say. So when we got there, they had memorized what they're going to say, or they thought they had. And then they start to talk, and they'd sweat, and they couldn't talk, they couldn't be clear, and back and forth and that. So nowadays, we don't do that because people are developing these videos for themselves, and part of our arrangement with them is they're sharing them. And when they do this, they really have, they really do use it for multiple purposes. One of the 6 sticky phrases that we have is called the capacity to talk the walk. So whatever you're doing, and what you saw there, students, incredibly articulate. They never had to practice that, because that's what they do. Those were 3 schools learning from each other over a period of 6 weeks. And so the clarity comes tripping off their tongue. In fact, on coherence, if I could go into one of your schools, if I could speak French better, and I could tell after 2 hours whether you had coherence or not. Because all I would have to do is take 4 different teachers separately and say, tell me about the goals of the school, what are you doing to fulfill them, how much progress are you making, and what steps are next. So I take them 4 separately. No, they don't talk to each other. If the school has coherence, I will get consistency and specificity. If it doesn't have coherence, I'll get vagueness and contradiction. Talk the walk is an indicator that coherence has happened. And these videos are like that. We have, we will convert our best videos en français. We've done this in Spanish because one of our groups is Uruguay in Latin America. And so all of our videos that we use there are Spanish subtitles, or they're in Spanish because they're producing them in Spanish and they have English subtitles. So this is coming as a media. So I want to now get a little more analytical and say, what is our actual model that we've developed in the 4 years? And it starts with deep learning. These are the 6 C's. That's what they are. And then we surround it with, I guess I'll call it the pedagogy. There are 4 things. One are the pedagogical practices themselves. Another is the importance of partnerships between and among students, teachers, and parents. A third is changing the learning environment. And a fourth is leveraging digital, connecting to digital. We have rubrics for each of these 4 that have been co-developed with the groups we're working with. And that's the essence of the model, if you like. But it's got a lot of visual kind of energy in it coming from the videos you'll see. Another thing we have is school conditions, another set of protocols. It's basically the collaborative culture of the school. Is the school got a collaborative culture? So that's just situating that. The next one we have is the district conditions, which is the school board, or in the case of Finland, it's the municipalities, because they're the ones that are responsible for the schools. And in the case of New Zealand, it's the networks of schools because they don't have districts. So whatever the local cluster is, and then we have system conditions, which are policies. So this, again, we try to be as succinct as we can, but also comprehensive. Because if you leave one of these out, it doesn't work. And although we don't mind leaving out system conditions, in one sense, because we're not going to spend a lot of time trying to convince politicians if they're not going in that same direction. We'd rather build it from the bottom and the middle up, so it puts pressure on the policies. That's how that works. So here's our emergent discoveries, we call them. Helping humanity is a big theme. Life and learning. There's no distinction between life and learning. Students are agents of change. Students say to us about citizenship, they basically say, I don't want to be a citizen of tomorrow 10 years from now. I want to be a citizen of tomorrow today. Because that's the world needs us, me. And the energy coming from students is unstoppable, unbelievable, but it has to be enabled. Intrinsic motivation, this is all about the drive to make a difference. And these 3 C's we found out, they're catalytic. It means if you start with any one of these 3, they ramify. So we don't say, okay, do all 6 C's starting tomorrow. We say, where are you going to start? And in Ottawa Catholic, which is one of our districts, they have 83 schools. All 83 now, after 4 years, are doing the 6 C's. They're required, so to speak, to select at least 1 C. They can't stop at 1. It's impossible to stop at 1, but they can have a choice. Where do we start in this? And then the discovery about inequity has been a fantastic one. Strategies for inequity, good for all, especially good for students who are not connected. And then these are my 6 sticky phrases. Start slow to go fast. In other words, if you're a leader, you want to be able to start somewhere. But in all of those cases of success we have on video, the principal, for example, went in and said, I had to build relationships. I had to build a degree of trust. And as soon as I was able to do some of that, we started to do things. And when we started to do things, it accelerated. So it was slow, and then it ramped up. Second one, this about talk the walk again. I mentioned that. Third one, use the group to change the group. This, instead of the leader trying to change one person at a time, you mobilize the group interacts. Guess what happens? They change. The multiples are much, much better. Precision, not prescription, and that the part about autonomy and interaction, trust and interaction. This is an interesting thing about trust. Ronald Reagan, when he was president, trying to make a deal with Gorbachev, asked his interpreter, give me a Russian proverb because I want to pretend I know something. And so the one he got was trust but verify. Trust but verify. What this means is I don't trust you, actually. And we get a deal, and then I look over your shoulder and make sure you're doing it. But the other one, trust and interact, is very different. This is participating as a learner under conditions of trust. If we have a relationship of trust and we're interacting, I don't have to worry about accountability. Why? Because I'm there. I'm interacting. I don't need a second opinion. I can see it. I'm part of it. And then this part about go outside to learn inside is really important, that you don't stay just within your school, that you go beyond that. The new leadership, I think, I'll just let you, because I want to get to the questions now. The new leadership that we're talking about is the best single thing I can think about expressing it is co-learning. The leader is a learner, co-learning with teachers and with students. And in fact, one of the nice distinctions in the literature on this is that leaders have to be, I love this distinction, have to be apprentices and experts at the same time. They should know something, that's the expert part, but they also have to learn something from others. In fact, a lot of our leaders say, I learned so much from teachers, from students. I've learned so much. So being a learner, but you can't be just a learner all the time. You have to have some good ideas. And the more you learn, you have good ideas. So it's back and forth, expert, apprentice, and developing from there. This is one I'm just going to introduce to you and not ask you to do it, although you have the material. One of the schools in Australia took our notion about excellence and good for all students, especially those, and they used the metaphor of the canary in the mines that many of you will know about. The canary in the mines are miners having canaries in the mine who detect when something is wrong with the air, too much methane or carbon monoxide, whatever. And the canaries notice it first, and they ring the alarm bell, and then there's some advance warning. So we adapted that. This school adapted, and I've been using it very, very well lately, which is to, and if we had a longer workshop, we could do this, is to think of a student in your class that could be a canary child, who is somebody who is not doing well, not high profile, stays on their own, but had you paid attention to it, you could have done something maybe. And so when we do this now, and I've given you the description on one page, it's towards the end of your handout, of what the canary child definition is. And then on the second page, there's 9 questions, I think, about how you might address this. And we're now seeing that this is the way. This actually is about 2 of the 4 things I started with in the triangle: caring, relationships, and life circumstances. If you start to get sensitized to the canary child phenomenon, you will be into the domain of caring relationships and the life circumstance of that individual. And that's the one part of it. The good news is once that's freed up, they take off in learning. Not all of them, but many of them. And there's a whole new key to getting great learning from there. So leadership in the middle, I just want to end with that before I turn it over to you for questions. It is about freeing up energy in the middle. This is a little bit of our abstract diagram. I can put it this way, succinctly. Wherever you are in the system, when you look upward, don't think of yourself as I'm supposed to implement the policies that are above me. Think of it, we use the word exploit, but it's a hard word to translate accurately. Think of it as I'm proactive in relation to the things above me, which means I'm going to figure out how some of those things can help me with local priorities. So we want the center of gravity to shift to the person doing the action, looking upward. Secondly, if I'm upward, so to speak, looking downward, the key concept is liberate. Liberate the group below you. Not the individuals, but the group, and you're learning with the group and you're developing it. And then the third one is lateralize everywhere, which is make sure you expand on that leadership from the middle. So we're going to get some questions now from you. I hope you've been keeping track of them. Just to warm up for yourselves as we shift to this mode, I'll ask you to turn to the person that you've been talking to and pick up the 2 things I started with this morning. Was what's the best idea you got in the last 2 hours? So think about that. And second, what's the biggest question you have in your mind? Best idea, the plus side. Biggest question, the flip side of that coin. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to generate that, and then we're going to hear from you on either or both of those. Best idea and biggest question. So 5 minutes to you to get your ideas sorted. So in a minute, I'll invite you, remember you have a choice. The choice is the best idea or the biggest question. And so I hope you'll have some of both of those. Whenever we get out of balance, I might ask you to switch to the other one. So we have 2 microphones up there. And then I'm going to be complicated here because I'm going to have 3 microphones at once. So when you ask, we'll get the translation. So just put up your hand and you'll get noticed. And just tell us what your best idea was or your biggest question. There's a lot of autonomy out there, but not much collaboration. Yeah. Okay, there's one there. One right there beside you.
Ah. Yeah. Merci, Anne.
J'ai bien aimé toute la préoccupation que vous avez pour enlever l'iniquité. Comment peut-on y arriver?
So the question was, how do you get there? Right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I gave you a lot of ideas about the do's and don'ts of getting there. And it really is changing the culture of the school. Everything I talked about are people who figured out how to get there. And what we've done is pull out the insights about that. So think of it this way. Your first thing to think about is what I'm doing is changing the culture. That's the main thing. I'm changing the culture. The way people interact, what they value. And we've given you the coherence framework, which has advice in it. If you look at each of those chapters, it says, how do you go about focusing direction? How do you go about collaboration? How do you go about learning? How do you go about securing accountability? It's all in there. But unlike most things, I guess, it's not a recipe. There is, when you're dealing with numbers of humans, you can't say, okay, let's do the following 10 things that will work. Although I think we have boiled it down to a small number of things, such as a coherence framework, that does work. Another thing you can do is start interacting with other places that have done it. This is one of our biggest sources of learning. For example, if you're interested in, let's say, early learning, I wouldn't go to the research on early learning to say, where should I start? I would say, who's doing it well? And let's figure out how to cross-visit to see what it is they're doing. And then I will get some ideas. Then I might check it out in the research. So there's no, the business of starting into it, knowing that you're changing culture. And then finally, I would say, you're not doing this as a leader without telling other people. You're saying to other people, we want to work on coherence. We want to work on me as a leader, if I'm the leader, which means I'm not going to impose things. We're going to figure out things together. I'm going to have good ideas, but you'll have good ideas. So there's nothing like doing that. And I guess I did say a final thing, but the other thing I would say, if what you're doing is not working, doing something that's not working is not very satisfactory either. So you're not losing much by trying to make a change if the current situation isn't satisfactory. And I hope if you join the NPDL, as we call it, the deep learning, that there will be schools that join the process in order to work on it, to get good, and have support from each other and from us and others to do that. So you have to get going with it. You have to have good support. You have to have good motivation to want to try something. All right. 1 or 2 more.
Bonjour. Il y a une donnée qui m'a frappé ce matin. Concernant les devoirs, je sais que vous appuyez beaucoup sur les recherches. Je sais que vous avez beaucoup travaillé à ce niveau-là. J'aimerais que vous soyez capable de nous expliquer davantage comment ce concept-là de devoir, comment changer la culture, comment réfléchir, comment le repenser, le camper pour nos élèves du 21e siècle.
The answer is I can't. Tell you on the spot. I think it's one of those things that you can't what we say in English, cherry pick one factor, say should we do it or not, because it's a combination of 4 or 5 things. I think there is some good work on homework that's valuable. You take up homework and you take it up the next day back and forth. Pasi Selberg, our colleague from Finland, has a good lecture on how there should be less homework and more learning, as he defines it. So I don't know the answer to that, but every one of these questions, it should be on your agenda if it's important to you. But I would not start, as I said, with one factor and say we better clean this up, because it'll be too detached. You have to have as your driving force the deeper learning, the collaboration to get there, and then within that driving force you can begin to look at particular things. So anyway, I'm sure you could find other places that have addressed the homework. You could just do the search and practice, as we've seen. You keep seeing these articles come, the do's and don'ts of homework. They're out there. You can look them, but you have to decide yourself whether they fit or not. Okay, let's have another one.
Bonjour. Ma question est la suivante. Elle concerne l'inéquité entre les élèves. Est-ce que vous favorisez des groupes homogènes dans une école ou hétérogènes, c'est-à-dire des élèves qui sont classés selon leurs forces dans des écoles ou dans des programmes particuliers? Je rêve du jour où un jour on va peut-être évaluer en fonction de l'amélioration de chacun des élèves et non de leur intelligence. Maintenant, comment y arriver?
So let's start with the goal. The goal, I said, was reducing inequity on learning outcomes for all groups. No subgroup should be doing less well than any other subgroup. So the centerpiece of the goal is reducing inequity. And it's also getting more serious, because if you look at what's happening in society, that about who's got money, who doesn't have money, who has housing, who doesn't have that. There's a trend that's just incredibly powerful, where there's growing inequity in almost every society. Growing inequity, and it's going fast. And when inequity gets too large, it starts to erode trust and social cohesion. And if you look at the surveys on trust in countries, they show 2 things. They show some countries have greater trust as a social measure than other countries. So the Scandinavian countries have greater trust. Probably Canada does. US, trust is down here. UK, trust is way low. So trust is one indicator. But I think the answer to your question is I favor heterogeneous groups, if I had to do a forced dichotomy, because you want to show how everyone can learn. And that in lots of the heterogeneous groups, we see older kids are helping younger kids who have this. So if you do a homogeneous group, you produce too much division for the subgroup. You have to have diversity. The same thing applies to adults. I wouldn't want a school that just had all teachers who wanted to do collaboration, so we isolate them as a homogeneous group that wanted collaboration. Collaboration has to be for everybody. So you have to figure out every group and build those in. The essence of what I'm saying is the ingredients that have to go into the solution. They're not a particular 5 steps for each one, although we can do that in some ways. It's really going for overall solutions. Okay, we have a couple more. Yep.
Bonjour, nous sommes des passionnés. Alors, quelquefois, le facteur temps peut jouer en notre faveur ou en notre défaveur. J'aimerais que vous nous parliez un peu du facteur temps, soit dans la durée d'implantation de la nouvelle culture ou du facteur temps qu'on se donne dans notre quotidien de travail pour y arriver.
Yeah, so let's take the time factor, as was said. We used to have an observation that it takes 3 or 4 years to change elementary school, 6 or so years to change a high school, 8 or 9 years to change a district, and forever to change a university. So, because we've been there. But I want to now say that we have accelerated the timeline for success. And this is very clear in our work. I just showed you the one school from Anaheim that within 16 months, they changed the culture from mediocre to fantastic. So think of it this way. Is what you're doing now, is it satisfactory to you? That's my first question. Are you happy with the way things are? And if the answer is you're not happy, why would you keep on doing it? I don't have time to change, but I have time to do the wrong thing. That's kind of what it feels like, right? You're not doing it on purpose. You're just stuck in inertia. So I'd say the first part is, how dissatisfied are you with the way things are? And if you're pretty dissatisfied, it's up to you to start changing in the direction that I'm talking about. Because then, and I do say, we've accelerated because we've involved teachers. We've accelerated because we've involved students. We've accelerated because we involve parents in the partnership. All of those things that are the mobilizing others from leadership from the middle accelerate change. And that it is getting faster. Quality change that operates faster. So we will continue to document that, but there's no good reason not to open the door. You don't have to do everything the first day. We're talking about, remember, start slow to go fast. You start to build it, you get momentum, you get more people on board. There is no easy solution to this, but I can say that the status quo is going to kill us. Kill us with inequity, and kill us with frustration, and eventually calamity. So this is urgent. And it's not just to do with climate change, it includes that. It has to do with social change. Okay. Do we have one more? Tom.
Bonjour. Est-ce qu'il existe des pays ou des écoles qui organisent des services en fonction des apprentissages des élèves plus qu'en fonction de leur âge physique?
Yeah, and I think Finland is one of those countries, but let's just stop here, and I'll get to your question in a moment. About 2.5 years ago, Google, the education team in the US, asked me to do a blog. They said, we've just commissioned a study on Finland, and we have it. It's completed. And we'd like you to read the research study and write a blog on what other countries can learn from Finland. And that was my assignment. So I read the research report. It was something that I knew enough about Finland. It rang true, it was pretty good, etc. And then I titled my blog this, Find Your Own Finland. Don't go to Finland to find yourself. Go to yourself to find yourself. Your surroundings, your country, your culture. It doesn't mean you shouldn't borrow things, you should. But you see where the essence is. On your question, in deep learning, there is a lot more heterogeneous cross-age learning, just what they do. Because you don't need to change the whole structure in order to increase the degree of interaction. We have all kinds of schools, I'll go back to Ottawa Catholic, where grade 7 students are working with grade 3 students. And where heterogeneous students are working with each other. So there's nothing to stop you. In our model of changing the learning environment, leveraging digital, changing partnership, changing practice, it all is open to that possibility. And every time someone says, we can't do the X or Y in my school, we can find another school where they're actually doing X and Y in the same jurisdiction. So we've got to take some risk. If it's important to you, start making the changes. And you can make, even within the structure we have now with age group, you can make a lot of changes that free up homogeneous groups and create heterogeneous learning. Same age as well as cross-age. So no excuses not to do it. Okay, do we have one more? We're sort of getting warmed up here. I'm going to show another short video, 4 minutes. And again, think of your ABC. And this is, and also think about, in both of these videos, we featured students talking the walk. You hardly see any teachers, a little bit. But it's mostly students who have become so activated about their own learning, they're able to describe it to themselves, to each other, and then cause more of it. We have several videos where teachers are talking the walk. So it really is getting clear about this. So I'd like you to Think about, stick with your letter, A, B, or C, your two C's that you were looking at, and see what you interpret in this clip. It's called Warana. It's a school, again, in a different part of Australia. The first one you saw was in outside Melbourne. I think this is another part of the state. So think about this and look at it as another example. I don't mean any of the examples as literal. I mean that they're part of the domain that we are now talking about and seeing.
The Enigma mission came from the students' ideas. They wanted to be able to capture something that was slightly mysterious, something that grabbed your attention. I'm out going about my business and I'm going to find the answers.
An Enigma mission is a project based on deep thinking, and basically you have to choose a topic and you have to research very, very deep on it, and the more deep the better.
Welcome to the Enigma portal. Your task as a member of an Enigma mission is to explain the great paradoxes, conundrums and mysteries of our existence.
An Enigma mission is kind of like a passion project and something that the teachers will help challenge us to expand our knowledge of what happens around the world and what's in the real world out there.
I chose autism as my topic because I have a relative that is autistic, and at first I didn't know anything about autism and I was very interested in the topic.
I chose to do my Enigma mission based on the thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger.
Miss Vine, our teacher, she said she would pick a few students to do this project about bone integration. And so we took up that challenge and we tried to do that.
But the main challenge for me was DNA. I was like so interested. I mean, learning from DNA is an Enigma mission in itself. I mean, it's not a question, it's a whole Enigma mission.
I interviewed people and tried to find out their understanding of autism, and I contacted a scientist.
I had to research about the animal and the process of bringing it back to life. I also contacted a paleontologist named Michael Archer. Him and a group are trying to bring animals back to life.
I'm not going to grow up to be a doctor, but I am going to grow up to be a computer engineer. So I don't know how genes can link with that, but with my genes I could produce some sort of new software or something.
We want them to be thinkers. We want them to be people who can create change, people who can make a difference.
This has changed my idea for what I want to be when I grow up. And also, I want to try and say to the world that not everyone's the same, pretty much. It's just because they have different body parts and stuff like that, it doesn't mean they're any different from us.
I think it's given me a whole new look of autism, and I think it's shown me a lot of what it's about, and I think I would like to be working on autism in the future and trying to help people with autism.
Debrief with the person beside you, but you're thinking of these C's two at a time. You're doing that. And I want to end with saying how much of these ideas are coming bottom up. If you go to the description of Ottawa Catholic, just because we've researched it, there are 83 schools in Ottawa Catholic District. They started in year 1 with 7. They paved the way for 8 more to join in year 2, so 15. And then in year 3, they had paved the way, and the rest of the 83 joined. So by the end of 24 months, they had all 83 schools. And paving the way is important because they didn't just say it's going to be expanded. In fact, when you do change that's attractive, more people want to join earlier than you can handle. So this is how they do. But that's one point. The second point is that, and the leaders will tell you this, almost all of the ideas they're working on came from the bottom. They enabled them, they opened it, but they didn't come in as leaders and say, we better do this plus that. They made it possible for groups to define what are the next steps, schools to do, to learn from each other, and the whole thing. And then they started to capture what was working and then feed it out, and people wanted to do more of it. So this is very much a change in culture. And this is a change in culture that requires the mobilization of everybody in that participates in it, has a chance to sort it out. And it also involves tapping into motivation. When I compared our work with Dan Pink, who's a psychologist who wrote the book called Drive, where he talks about, he did research on extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. He said intrinsic motivation, or extrinsic I should say, is when it's carrots and sticks. It's when you're punished for the wrong thing, you're rewarded for the right thing. He said we know that that doesn't work. It can work a little bit for a short period of time. It always fails because it's not internal. He said if you shift to internal, and this is the research is again clear, our research is clear. Internal, he said, and I was interested to see how it mapped onto our conclusions because it was almost identical. He said intrinsic has the following three things, we've added a fourth. First one he said is sense of purpose. These students that you see in scores are getting a sense of purpose that they never got by just learning literacy or by just doing something by the book or homework, whatever. They got it by being part of something that was worthwhile to them. So sense of purpose was one. The second one he said was mastery. We call it capacity building. If you get good at something, you want to do more of it usually. If it's worthwhile, you get good at it, you do more of it. The third one he called a degree of autonomy. That's the recognition that we've had that you can't be, it's not a group think proposition, and it's also not everybody on their own. In between that are the kind of degrees of autonomy that individuals have. And the fourth one that we've added, because it's an intrinsic motivator for us, is connection with others to do something worthwhile. That's what to us is the humanity part. We have a neuroscientist on our team, Jean Clinton, and when I ask her about anything, I would say, to what extent is something innate to the human nature? And I ask her about being connected to others. So what is it, like when you're born, do you have something in your brain or in your genes that is innate to wanting to connect to other people? And she said, the research is clear, unequivocally it's there. If you have a bad life, it can drum it out of you. If you've never been, if you've had a terrible life from day one, that's a different story. But if you really open up the opportunity, you get to this. So this should be the essence of education, tapping into a human and social motivation for the purposes that I'm describing here. It's really necessary that we start to do this on a bigger scale. That's what we're trying to do. I hope some of you will join us in this, and thank you very much for today.